Well, hello, friends and nonprofit leaders. It's me, Laura Zelke, your host for the Your Nonprofit Life podcast. Today, we're in the third of our series of 4 podcasts, which are educating us about a variety of hot-button issues, including the humanitarian crisis at the southern border, the shrinking resources available to refugees who were invited to resettle here in America, and what's being done to support the most marginalized in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Now, today, I'm bringing you one of the most powerful podcasts I've recorded thus far. Please carve out some time to really listen to this because it's not only informative, it's riveting. You're going to love today's guest. She figured out who she was early and moved across the country to find a place she could thrive. Nonprofit leadership really wasn't part of the plan, but also she didn't have a plan. She just knew what she didn't want, and that was enough. But, as is often the case, her steps were directed toward the nonprofit sector, and now she's the leader of a nonpartisan organization fighting to protect the voting rights of all Californians. S1E28 Doute is the executive director of the League of Women Voters of California, based in Sacramento. And FYI, their work is not exclusively about women. In this episode, you'll learn how this 100-year-old organization was founded by women who fought hard for the 19th Amendment, granting white women the right to vote, and how over the past century they've advocated for voter rights for everyone and provided nonpartisan voter education as well. You'll also hear S1E's nonprofit leadership story, and it's a doozy. I watched her navigate her father's sudden illness and death with the grace few of us would have had when being faced with an incredible lack of compassion. And instead of giving up, she regrouped, got really clear on what matters most, and is now serving in a place where she's doing meaningful work with an organization who appreciates her passion and dedication. I cannot wait for you to meet S1E28 Doute, the executive director of the League of Women Voters of California, who I am honored to call friend. Hey, have you ever wished you could hear some good news for a change? Well, I might have just what you've been hoping for. Welcome to Your Nonprofit Life, where we remove our rose-colored glasses and explore what leaders are actually doing to move their nonprofits from messy to thriving without burning out in the process. I'm Laura Zelke, Director of Member Experience for the Nonprofit Leadership Lab. Join me each week to explore the ups, downs, and whoopsie daisies of your nonprofit life. Let's get started. Well, welcome, S1E28. I'm so excited to have you here on the Your Nonprofit Life podcast with me. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, and I have to say, we are recording this podcast on the day that the FBI foiled the plot by some militia group up in Michigan to kidnap their governor and possibly even try and overthrow their state government. And I thought, wow, here I am. I have the opportunity to interview S1E28 Doute, who is the executive director at League of Women Voters in California. And with what you've told me about your organization, I thought, wow, this is like perfect timing. I just finished watching the news brief, and the charges against these people, it's really serious. Like, what country are we living in right now?
I know. I mean, there's never really been any other time in our lives where we would wake up to the news that a domestic terrorist group is attempting to kidnap a governor and hold their own trial, air quotes, trial for this person, and potentially think about trying to overthrow the state government. It's such a different world we're living in right now. And I think I haven't been able to sort of track with all the news today, but it's mind-blowing, and it makes me think about our mission a little bit. I mean, our mission is empowering voters and defending democracy. And when you look at these kinds of things, assaults on our democracy from every side, it just feels like our mission is everywhere. It's maybe more important than it's ever been in our lifetimes.
Well, I would agree. It's really hard for me to fathom that this is happening in the United States of America and that the rhetoric that's been going on, the political unrest being, instead of the country coming together, it's like lighter fluids been squirted onto the flames to really ramp it up. And I don't know what to say. My whole family is from Michigan. Like when you go back to my grandma and grandpa, and my Nana and Papa, they were in Michigan. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope I'm not related to any of those guys. I was like, I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
tree checking. I don't think I'm related to any of them, but it is just really scary. And so I cannot wait to hear about your organization. And I will say, I learned something when you and I did the pre-interview that we did. Even though it's called League of Women Voters, your organization isn't just for women, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, we were built out of the suffrage movement to grant women the right to vote. We've got decades of strength built on women's leadership, and we are an inclusive organization. We welcome everyone. We have men who are members, we have trans people who are members, we have people who are non-binary who are members, and we welcome everyone. We want all people to be a part of the league.
And is that unique just to the California League of Women Voters, or is that just nationwide? That's what League of Women Voters is all about.
I think League of Women Voters is about that nationally. We've got a big effort on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It comes out of our national organization and it comes out of our state organizations. It comes from our local organizations. We are a bit of a model of democracy in the way that we work. Our members sort of define some of our priorities. So it's a combination of grassroots up and leadership down in the way that we work. But we are committed at every level to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this year in particular, it's the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. It is the 100th birthday of the League of Women Voters. And really, when you look back at history, it was white women who got the right to vote 100 years ago. It wasn't until 1965, really, when the Voting Rights Act was originally passed, women of color got the right to vote. And so we look back at that history and we know that the league wasn't always as inclusive as it needed to be, and it didn't always fight for the people it needed to fight for at all times. And we're committed as an organization at every level to that looking different in the next 100 years. And I think that as the country has been reckoning with these concerns, the league has already made the commitment for our organization that we're going to do this in the future.
I find that very comforting to know that there's an organization out there that is really representing everyone and willing to go to the mattresses for democracy. Really love. So your organization, anyone can join who's a registered voter, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
You don't have to be a registered voter.
Okay.
We don't really have a lot of restrictions on joining.
Okay.
Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. And, we envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. And there are ways to participate in our democracy that don't involve voting. And so there's a place for everyone in the league.
That is really exciting. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what the league actually does? So you said empower. What else did you say? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. That's a big bucket of things.
Right. And so how do you do that?
I'll first say that we're a nonpartisan political organization, and that can be confusing to people. So I think up front, to define that, nonpartisan means that we will not and do not endorse political parties or candidates, but we're political. We have positions on issues, we have an advocacy role, and we're nonpartisan. So understanding that sort of the nuance around that is an interesting thing when we talk about the league. We want to empower people to participate in local government, in state government, in federal government, to vote, to use their voice in the many ways that are available to us to create the change you want to see. So specifically, there's a way for everybody to sort of follow their own passion with the league. So in California, a variety of positions. So you might be interested in climate change. We have a climate change committee who's working on climate change issues around the state. We do advocacy on climate change policy. And there's places for people to come together and work on that. Maybe it's racial justice. Maybe it's criminal justice reform. Maybe it's housing and homelessness. We have positions on all of those issues. So people can join the league and connect with other folks who are working on those. And they can work in their local governments. They can work on advocacy at the state level. And it's really, we provide a way for people to follow their passion in getting engaged with government to create change.
So
And in California, we're really interested in equity-based policy. So driving change with equity-based policy. So that's sort of one side of our work. The other side is this idea of voter protection, voter engagement, voter outreach. And obviously that's where we're spending a whole lot of time this year, although we are incredibly excited that the California Racial Justice Act was just signed by the governor. And that is a bill that we've worked very hard on with coalition partners this year. So that's something we're excited about, but voting rights is where we're at right now. We are eating, sleeping, breathing voting rights. And in a lot of ways, part of our role is to hold government accountable as well. It's not just the policy and the advocacy and the getting people engaged, but we hold government accountable. So we've been involved in a number of lawsuits this year to ensure that Californians have access to safe, accessible voting during the pandemic, both by mail and in person, because there are real equity issues when you talk about just vote by mail. And we need to make sure that safe in-person voting was available as well, and that the government is bringing that and making that available to people broadly. And we work with a large coalition of groups to ensure that. So the government accountability side is also a piece, and then education, voter education. We have a bucket of things that we do to provide voter education. So we produce the Easy Voter Guide, which is community reviewed for literacy accessibility. So everyone can understand the ballot measures and the mechanics of voting.
Are you doing that for the entire state of California?
We do it for the state of California. We only do the statewide ballot measures.
Okay.
So your city, your county will have different local measures, but this guide is for the state. So we cover the 12 ballot measures that we've got on the ballot this year, the mechanics of voting statewide, like what's new, what do people need to know? Our guide this year has also a focus on criminal justice positions, because here's where we are in the world. Criminal justice and criminal justice reform are of huge interest to people. So we really have a focus this year too on helping people understand why their local governments matter and what kind of change can happen if they vote. And we translate it into 5 languages because we know that people can access information better in a language that comes first nature to them.
Right. So I'm assuming one of them is Espanol.
Yes.
Because I grew up in California and I can say more than taco and enchilada in Spanish. I took 6 years.
Wow, impressive.
So se habla un poquito de español. But what other languages?
All right, you're going to catch me off my toes on this one because I never can remember them off the top of my head.
So what about Vietnamese?
Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, Spanish.
And Vietnamese,
English.
Korean, Chinese,
I think
Spanish,
that covers them.
English, 5. Okay, I was going to say, because I know from growing up in Stockton, there was a huge Vietnamese population that came in after the horrific time they had over there.
Yeah, I mean, California is a hugely diverse
state. I don't remember what it's called. Cambodia.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, with that kind of diversity across the state, it really is in service of the voters to make sure that information is accessible, because you're more likely to vote if you understand what you're voting for. Your knowledge is power, that sort of thing.
Right. Do you have that voter guide online?
Yeah, we have it online.
Okay, so when we do the show notes page, we'll put a link to it in case anybody wants to see kind of what we're talking about here. Maybe is League of Women Voters in every single state?
I believe there's a chapter of League of Women Voters in every state, and many, many cities or counties have their own local leagues. So ours, and at the state and local level, we all do different things. There are some things you'll find leagues do pretty consistently. Local leagues pretty consistently will do candidate forums and present information in their local communities. So I think you'll find that consistently. But projects like the Easy Voter Guide, that's a California project. You may not find that across the country.
Okay.
We also have Voters Edge, which is an online ballot tool where you can put in your address and you'll see everyone on your ballot. and every issue on your ballot, and the candidates give us information in their own words. We publish it exactly as they give it to us, spelling mistakes and all, because we think that you should see exactly what your candidates say. That is the level of transparency in government we believe in, so that you can make educated decisions on what to put on your ballot. That's translated as well. There is a national version of that runs separate from California. We call Vote 411. We operate Voters Edge separately because we have a little more information in terms of candidate finance in Voters Edge. So you can see also where the money is coming from in these campaigns. So we have a number of projects that are really designed to educate voters.
It sounds like it. And I kind of wonder, in the news this past week, I think it was the governor of Texas decided that there should only be one drop-off voting location in each county. And so I was thinking about this in context of League of Women Voters, is that's the type of thing that you would be fighting against, right? Like that would be a lawsuit with you guys. If the governor of California said, we're only going to allow one drop-off place per county.
Oh, we would be in court so fast.
In California. Yeah. I was going to say, I can't imagine how that's even legal to do something like that, because it feels like voter suppression.
I mean, this year is the year where they're saying the quiet parts out loud with regards to voter suppression. Voter suppression has a long, ugly history in our country, but in more recent years, it's been the quiet part. It's been the part you can't say out loud because you can't really admit that you're doing it. But this year, it's legitimized. It's been legitimized as a campaign strategy. And it's really fascinating to look at all of the things that have been legitimized. And I mean, we started by talking about a domestic terrorist cell trying to take over, kidnap a governor. All of this is in the same vein. Things that should not be legitimized are legitimized. So those are the kinds of things. When I say we're going to court, in California, we've been to court. We've been involved in 6 cases this year, and leagues around the country have been involved in cases for all of these very similar reasons: to hold government accountable to giving people the right to use their voice. This is our right. Voting is not partisan. Voting is not political. This is our right. And that's what leagues around the country are doing. So yeah, that's absolutely the kind of thing we're fighting.
Yeah, I was wondering. And so let me ask you this. How did you end up at League of Women Voters? Have you always been involved in this kind of political activism type thing? Is it something that you studied in college, or how did you end up in California at the League of Women Voters?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. I did not study any sort of activism in college, but I went to college in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I went to Randolph-Macon Women's College, and I came out when I was in college. And so just my existence was political in Lynchburg, Virginia.
I would say so, because that's also the location of Liberty University, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So given that backdrop, and considering it was a number of years ago, 20 or so years ago, the world was a different place. And the world was a very different place in Lynchburg, Virginia 20 years ago from where I am now. So just my existence was political. And I majored in philosophy, religion, marketing. So I was not working on activism, but in my personal life, I was constantly, at city council meetings trying to get non-discrimination laws passed for housing or employment in the city. And so it was sort of born of this intense desire to protect my own rights and guarantee a future for myself and whatever family I may one day have. And that's sort of where I was born. I had a friend who, I looked back, she gave me a book when we were in college, and the inscription she wrote in it was, "To Stephanie, who wants to eat fire one day," because that I had a fire. And so that's kind of where my momentum came from. But my career was not always activism and nonprofits. That's the kind of stuff I did in my spare time. When I finished college, I kind of didn't have a direction. I was just kind of figuring out what I wanted to do next. And I had $100, no job, a bag of clothes, a guitar, and a one-way plane ticket to California, and some strangers that I met on the internet that said I could live with them.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, what year was this?
Oh, dear. So I'm going to say this was like, it would have been 2000. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's still dial-up modems around that time and AOL and Prodigy
I think
and
this might have been a little after that.
a little
I think it would
after
have been
that.
a little after that.
I was going to say, I met my husband online and it wasn't quite cool yet to meet anybody online. Like people were saying things like, oh, what if he's an axe murderer? Yeah, what if he's not an axe murderer and he's actually a nice guy?
That's so funny because that's how I met my wife too. I met her online before it was cool, before it was common. Somebody said like, oh, how did you meet her? And you were like, on the computer.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. So $100 in your pocket, a guitar, a bag of clothes, and a one-way plane ticket to California to go stay at somebody's house who you had not met in real life.
Yeah.
And now you're still in California, though, so it must have worked out pretty well.
I am still here. It worked out. I bounced around for a little while, couch surfing and doing whatever random jobs I could find. I moved to a very small city in California, which possibly wasn't the best decision, but when you're just taking offers from random strangers, you land where you land. And I had my first job in California at Claire's Boutique. And I was piercing the ears of young children who didn't know better than to have me pierce their ears because it terrified me. I didn't last long at that because it terrified me to pierce ears. And I met my now wife right around that time. And I moved to Sacramento to be nearer to her and because there's more opportunity here. And that's when I started looking for my first quote unquote real job. And I called the temp agency and I said, I'll take whatever you have. And they said, we have a job. And the only requirement is that you can pronounce podiatric. Say it.
Podiatric?
Podiatric. And I said, okay. All right, podiatric. And they were like, great, you have a job. And that's when I started working at my first association. So it was the California Podiatric Medical Association, working on podiatry and education and such for podiatrists. So that was my introduction to nonprofit life through associations.
Okay. And then did you stay in that for a long time? Did you go straight from there to the Voters League or how was your journey?
Yeah.
Have you always done a league or association or memberships or stuff like that since you've been in the nonprofit sector?
So I've always been in membership organizations. I stayed at the Podiatry Association for 7 years, and then I worked at 2 other associations, sort of looking in different fields and expanding scope, trade association, professional associations. And when I came to League, it's because I was looking for something different. And League is a membership organization, but different from an association and a different organizational structure too. Mm-hmm. You know, the associations I worked in were 501c6s primarily, and the League is a 501c4 and a 501c3. So we're structured differently and we're here for a different reason. I really loved working in associations and I really love working at League for different reasons.
Yeah. And so I want to hear more about that. What was it that moved you from, say, the 501c6 arena over more to the 501c3, C4?
Yeah, it's a bit of a personal journey, honestly. In my last position, I was the executive director. And, you know, when you work somewhere every day, when you're in leadership, leadership's never about you, right? Leadership is always about everyone else. It's about your community. It's about your team. It's about the people you lead. It's never about you. And you ask yourself, do my values continue to align with the values here? Is this right for me? Because you give a lot of yourself as a leader. Is this right for me? And so I think all of us ask ourselves those questions as leaders. And I was certainly asking myself those questions. But what happened really that spurred my move was my dad got very sick. I got a call one day and they said, your dad's been found on the floor in his apartment and he's at the hospital and we don't know what's happening. We'll call you back. What happened was that my dad was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer. And once he went into the hospital, he did come out.
I remember that. And I know it was shocking and it was super aggressive.
It was. And he didn't know he had it. No one knew he had it.
Right. And he was in a different state, right? Like he doesn't live in California.
Right. My dad lived in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So I spent the next month flying back and forth from California to Tennessee over and over. And I have 3 kids, and simultaneously, while my dad was sick and in the hospital, and I was making a lot of his health decisions because he was unable to do it, simultaneously, my cat died, my dog died.
Oh
Right? Like
no.
it was intense. And in my job, the company itself was going through some challenges of its own. There was sort of a perfect storm in my life, but I did a lot of reflecting on my dad.
Yeah.
When he could speak, he would ask, how could I have not known? How could I have not known? And you could see him working through like all the things as he realized what was happening. Like he was on the cusp of retiring and moving to California so he could be near me and my kids. And it was dawning on him that that wasn't going to happen. And it was dawning on me as I watched him go through this that we in our lives, and I in my life, had let a little bit of inertia take over.
Yeah.
When I talk about, being a leader in a nonprofit, taking a lot out of you personally, I think it doesn't matter how much you love your work. This is work that just takes a lot. And that's okay because we want to give it. This means something to us. But when you find yourself in a position that it's not giving back to you,
Mm-hmm.
you have to start wondering. And that's where I was. And so watching sort of my dad channel through and process his regrets that he hadn't done things sooner, that it was too late now, he wasn't going to get to live near his grandkids, it made me think about my life.
Yeah.
So I thought about, why am I staying in a place where it feels like my values no longer align? What do I need? Right? I don't want to follow down a path of regret. What do I need? So I started taking stock in this process. And when my dad passed, it was very difficult. It was a month from when he collapsed to when he passed. So I knew it was time for me to move to an organization that's values as an organization and that's values in leadership more closely aligned to mine. And that's people first and making a better world. And so as I was sort of looking like, okay, what's my next step to get aligned with my values and so that I feel like I'm waking up every day purposefully, that's when I found the league. And maybe it was fortuitous timing that they were looking for someone right when I was looking.
Well, yeah, I would say so. So I remember when you learned about your dad, because in our village, we're pretty tight knit group, right? I mean, there's a lot of us, but we're pretty tight knit. And we were walking alongside of you while you were flying back and forth across the country. And from the outside, it kind of seemed like maybe you didn't have the support that maybe you should have had.
I think that is probably how I felt. I definitely had that experience. And I think that fed into sort of that personal journey I went on aligning my values because I didn't want to work for an organization that doesn't care about its people or doesn't express care about its people. And that is certainly the experience that I was having. And I think that sort of pushed my personal journey along because my values are that people come first. And that's the nonprofit space generally. That's one of the things I
Right.
love about it.
And it's not to pigeonhole an organization because there is no such thing as a static organization. They ebb and flow with the different people who are volunteering or who are on the board or who are on the staff. Like it could be completely different culture there now. But, while you were going through your time, it was this perfect storm of so many different things happening all at the same time. And it really caused you to do some reflection and make this bold move. And what does it feel like now that you get to wake up every morning? I mean, my gosh, how about waking up this morning? How about waking up tomorrow morning or the next day and knowing that what you're doing is actually critical to the life and continuance of the democracy republic that we live in, the democratic republic that we live in, that what you're doing actually matters and is making a big difference? What does that feel like?
I mean, I wake up fired up every day. I don't wake up and approach my days with, oh, well, I mean, some days we all do that, right? But generally, I wake up and every day I know that what we're doing matters. And even if the day is hard, even if the work is hard, even if it takes a lot out of me personally or any of those things, it matters. It matters. It matters not just to me. It matters because my kids can be proud of the work that I'm doing. We're working on a youth get out the vote campaign on Snapchat and TikTok. And we've got some grant funding to support it. And my 13-year-old was sitting next to me because we're in the middle of pandemic, so school's happening at home. So he was sitting next to me and I was on TikTok and he was like, "Mom, you're supposed to be at work, not on TikTok." And I was like, amazingly enough, today, TikTok is my job. I'm using TikTok at work. And I explained to him why. And he was like, "You're so lucky." And then he said, "And I'm actually super proud of you, if that even matters. I'm really proud of you." Like, to not just burst into tears at that moment because he's 13 and he would not have thought that was cool. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, like, my kids are proud of the work I'm doing. I'm proud of the work I'm doing. I feel like it makes a difference. Like, I'm fired up every day. And
Yeah.
I work with people who are fired up about what they're doing. And not my staff is fired up. Our board is fired up. Our members are fired up. And everybody's fired up, not because of their egos or because they want to build their reputation or any of those reasons. They're fired up because they're being the change. And that is, like, you can be passionate about that.
I wish the listeners could see, they probably hear the smile on your face right now. I wish they could see it because it's just, I'm getting goosebumps because I feel like, had you not gone through all of that, and it's not to say that it wasn't a really hard, sad time, because it was. But a lot of times it seems to me like in life, when we go through those really hard, like, how am I going to get through this kind of time where it's stuff's being thrown at you and it's really, really, really hard. It almost feels in a way like when you look back on it, it was like labor pains and you were birthing this new life, really. You kind of have really shifted from, you think back. I mean, it's like we all have those moments in life. Some people have them earlier than others. I had mine very late, but we have these moments where we do kind of have to realign and do have to reevaluate and take stock in what we're doing. And maybe this is part of privilege, that we're privileged to be able to make these choices because not everybody has that opportunity, and I want to acknowledge that. We're two white women. I know you said you came out when you were in college, but you still have the white skin. We do have this, but I think even across the board, there are these opportunities that we're given. The challenge is the opportunity. Joan keeps saying, what does this make possible? And I think that is the core of really solid leaders in the sector, is that you don't let it knock you down and out. You take that moment to reevaluate and make sure it's aligned. And if it's not, you make decisions and you start moving forward. And I have talked to some of the nonprofit leaders of color that we've had inside the lab that have joined us and shared stories with me. And I've seen it across. I don't think it's just a race thing. I just know that it could come across like that. And I want to acknowledge that. I don't know that it's something that's limited. I think it's just in life that as you're being prepared for the next thing, that sometimes there's kind of like this real compression and it really makes you stop and think, what am I doing? And could I be doing something different, that would maybe make a bigger difference? And I think about how grateful your organization has to be to have someone like you at the helm right now leading. And this year, like you said, it's 2020. Who knows what the next day is going to bring? Because my gosh, I don't even try like plans. What's a plan?
Right.
Yeah. What's it been like leading this year during COVID and it being an election year?
Well, it's so interesting because anytime you're a new executive director or even a new employee, no matter what, you're new somewhere, you need some time to get your feet under you, to learn the organization, to get established, build trust, etc. And I've been here less than a year at this point. So while doing that, it's been a crazy, wild ride. But I'll say, I think you hit on something really important, and it's what's the opportunity? Where's the opportunity here? And I think we find that in our personal journeys, where when things feel really, really hard, and they do, at some point in that journey, we find a place to figure out what the opportunities are so often. But that also carries true to our organizations. So as I started onboarding and we had the primary elections here in March, my first set here was to learn what happens during an election at the league. And at least I had a small scale learning process, not during the general election, which is exponentially bigger. But then we hit COVID, and we do have a lot of members who are older and high risk. And so we really had to reshape everything. And like all nonprofits, the funding world shifted, donations shifted, the way you operate shifted. And we had to navigate all of that just like everyone else. And at the same time, I had to do it as a new executive director that nobody really knew yet, but they had to trust that I was going to make good decisions. And they had to go out on a limb and trust that I was going to do right for the organization and I was going to make good decisions. And I think critical to that is communication and making sure that you're talking to everybody and coming back to that idea that leadership is not about you. There was nothing during that time that was about me. It was about our members. It was about our staff. It was about our board. It was about our constituents and the change we wanted to make in the world. And what did all of those people and groups need from me to feel like we were solid, we have a plan, we have a future, and we're coming through this? And there's transparency. You have to be transparent about what the challenges are. You have to be transparent about what the reality is. And you have to bring people with you. And I think for me, that's also part of my core values. And we worked through it together because it wasn't about me leading. It was about all of us coming together.
That really brings something up for me that, like you said, it's part of your core values. This is how you're aligned. And when you're saying transparent, to me, that rings, I'm always quoting Brene Brown. And that when you talk about transparency, to me, that's the authenticity. And that's why she's talking about it. You as a new ED, you're already in a one down position of if people are going to trust you or not. And the fact that you were able to come in, take charge, and get everybody on board so that you're this organization moving forward together and not infighting or doubting and all the drama that can go with something like that. To me, the fact that you have this desire that it's not about you, that it's about serving your people, it's about communication, being open, being transparent, being vulnerable, right? Being authentic, that those are the values then that are propelling your organization forward so that you're going into the home stretch. We're in less than a month now to this big election that we're having, that you're able to run this race and run it hard because you have a team with you. I hope that you feel supported. It just seems like you have, like, again, looking from the outside in, that you're in a place now, God forbid something would happen, but you would have a different level of support than maybe you had at other organizations in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough positive about the league community overall. The league community, our board, our staff. I mean, this group comes together. We are all working towards common purposes. We are all working towards common good. And there is a level of support, not just for me, but for each other, that is tremendous. It's hard for me to even put words around. When I was interviewed here, they said, we're like a family. We want our next executive director to understand that we're like a family and we don't want that to change. And I said, good, because that's how I like to work. But I didn't really understand, because everybody says that, if we're being honest. Everybody says like, oh, we're like a family. We love each other. Well, families also have big fights, but
I was going to say, it depends. What kind of family are you?
But this really is, we're a large community. Large communities are going to disagree about things. And that's actually, we embrace our disagreement because that makes us more productive. We disagree in productive ways. We channel ourselves to productive disagreements. It makes us better. It makes us stronger. It advances the work we're doing. And it's part of democracy, frankly. Disagreeing on things and coming to decisions is part of democracy. It's sort of part of our lifeblood to be able to do that. I feel like we're all very supported here. I'm grateful to work for and in and be able to continue to infuse those values into this work. And you talked about vulnerability a little bit, and that has not always been a strong suit for me. My personal leadership journey has involved cultivating that vulnerability because it is so essential to leading, especially during times of transition and crisis. And it did not come natural to me. I spent a lot of time reading Brene Brown, and I spent a lot of sort of internal self journeying work on it, because when we lead communities like this, we are working with people who have vulnerable feelings. I think about leading through COVID, and when we first went into lockdown, and like I said, we have a lot of members who are at higher risk for this. People are scared, and there's just this need to be able to acknowledge that and hold that with them, that fear that they're seen and heard and you experience it too, and to let you as a whole person as well, because that's what brings people together. And so I've worked very hard at being able to do that, and it's made me a better human. It's made me a better person. And I do think it has made me a better leader, or at least helped my leadership. Glad you flagged that, because it's been a huge thing for me.
Yeah. Well, I flagged it because I've done a lot of my own work too, right? It's like you said, vulnerability doesn't come naturally. I think that's why Brene and her teachings have kind of resonated so much throughout the world, is because maybe it's beat out of us at a young age. I don't know. We're raised not to be vulnerable. And so to get to be a really good, effective leader, you do kind of have to do some work on yourself, because the best leaders are vulnerable, not oversharing vulnerable, but just open and honest and transparent at the appropriate level. And so I just can't thank you enough for sharing so openly today, Stephanie, and sharing your journey, the ups, the downs, like I say in the introduction, the whoopsie daisies, that's why I'm doing this podcast, because it's great to learn how to do things from the quote unquote experts, but it's also really wonderful to hear about someone's journey, because we can all identify with certain parts of your journey. People are going to be at different places in their nonprofit journey. And I know that this is just going to touch some lives. And so before we wrap up, I did want to ask you, what's next for League of Women Voters? Like, what do you guys have on the horizon? Let's project out past the election. Okay, regardless of
past the election, Laura.
Well, we don't know how long we're going to be waiting for the results, and we don't know when there's a transition of power, what that's going to look like. What is next post-election for League of Women Voters?
So before we go on to what's next, I want to talk a little bit about that transition. And I just want to leave with a few words for people about the election. Vote, vote, vote. It is time to register to vote now. If you're not registered, register. Get your ballot. When you vote, text 3 friends or family members and get them to go vote at the same time. If they don't, remind them. If we all got 3 people to vote with us, we would triple the amount of people casting a ballot. The risk of voter intimidation at certain polls is real. If you see it, you can call the Nonpartisan Election Protection Hotline at 866-OUR-VOTE, OURVOTE. They will help you. If you see it, call. Voter intimidation is a crime. They will help you deal with it. Those are such important things to know in this election, more than any other election. The other thing you touched on, Laura, vote early. November 3rd is election day, not results day. And if it takes us 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get the results in, that's because the system's working, not because the system's broken. We will continually hear that that's because the system's broken. It is not. That's because the system is working. Votes are being counted and verified, and we know the system is doing what it's supposed to if that happens. So don't let that put you off. Don't let it cast doubt for you. It is a sign of effectiveness. And we want everybody to know that. And that voting early helps because there's less to do November 3rd looking forward because it can be done early in some cases. So
Right.
those are the things that I think voters need to know. And looking forward for the league, civic engagement does not stop at elections. We have the census this year. We've been doing a tremendous amount of work on the census. We've had cases about ensuring that undocumented persons are counted in apportionment, and other League of Women Voters is working on cases on the census timeline. Following census is redistricting, ensuring people-powered maps and fair redistricting across the country so that we do not see gerrymandered districts. We will continue to have local legislation. We will continue to have state legislation, national legislation. And like I said, League of Women Voters of California is focused on equity-based policy. So we'll do a lot of work going forward, looking at creating a more equitable future in California. That's really where you'll see us doing some work until we roll around to the next election and we start working on voting again.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, you've kind of fired me up to go check out and find the League of Women Voters here in North Carolina and see what I can do here. We're one of those quote unquote swing states, and when you mentioned gerrymandering, we actually had that this last election go round. There was a whole ridiculous thing that happened in our state in one of the counties, and it's real. It's funny because it's like I'm always thinking, oh, that was old history. We're past all that now. That was back in the olden days. Yeah, no, it's happening here in 2020, and we just have to make sure that we're awake, alert, registered, that we vote. One of the things that they're doing here, and I think they're probably doing it in other swing states, is you can register and get trained to go be a poll monitor, so that because of the voter intimidation, that they also will have people there who've been trained. So I signed up. I'm going to go get trained and go down on election day and be a poll monitor, because as we're gearing up for this election, we have to really do everything we can. Like, this is the time. Go to the mattresses and figure it out and do what you can to make sure that people, if they need help getting transportation to go drop off their ballots in Texas, then you can do that. You can call people, or maybe check with local civic organizations or churches or synagogues or mosques and see if they need somebody to help transport people who don't have cars so they can go drop off their ballots. It's just a really interesting time.
You're right. Check with your civic organizations. I just read this morning, and League of Women Voters does this typically at elections, but specific to Texas. I just read this morning that there's a partnership with Lyft, where Lyft will provide some free rides to the polls for people to help deal with this issue of only having one polling location and the difficulty of getting there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot happening, and it's really specific to our communities.
Right.
So talk to your organizations. You have a league. Your league is on top of this. And I love that you talked about poll monitoring. There are poll monitoring trainings happening with the League of Women Voters, with many, many aligned organizations. And those opportunities are there, and they are designed to counter voter suppression. And being trained in it is going to be really important so that you follow the laws around poll watching and so that you stay safe in the process. But I highly encourage everyone to get involved in that. And if your state or your county still needs poll workers, signing up to be a poll worker is another great opportunity to get involved this year.
Yeah. And they pay you for that, right?
They do pay you for that.
Yeah, they do pay you for that. I know they do here. Here, the other thing is, it's not so much about getting a ride to drop off your ballot as it is about getting someone to witness your signature. And so again, we just have to reach out and engage and do what we can to help make sure that everyone who wants to exercise their right to vote is able to do so. I'm trying to physically safe, non-intimidated, healthy kind of way. And that's what it's all about. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time today. This is just a critical conversation, Stephanie, and I'm so grateful that we were able to get into your super busy schedule right now. Thank you for coming on and just for sharing everything that you've shared during this interview.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on, Laura. It's nice to take the time to do a little self-reflection, even in the midst of everything going on. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, I know this conversation is going to be both informative and inspirational, and that is why we do it. So I am going to go ahead and sign off and say I will see you in the village.
All right. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks for listening. To access the show notes or share feedback on this podcast and link over to our socials, visit our website at yournonprofitlife.com. That's yournonprofitlife.com. And hey, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you're going to love The Village. It's our exclusive online community where we take what we're learning in the Nonprofit Leadership Lab and apply it. We take it to the next level with live Q&As, boot camps, online book clubs, and legit support from experts committed to helping you extend your nonprofit life. By the way, since we're just getting started, it would mean the world to us if you'd subscribe to the podcast and leave a great review on iTunes. The reviews will help us get the podcast in front of more people as we try to take the whole sector from messy to thriving. See you next time.